So in this section, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over the actual teaching and precepting as if you were in the front of the classroom. Obviously with a remote rotation, we're going to be creating the presentation, then recording the presentation as if we're going to be in front of people, but you'll get a lot out of hearing yourself and where we can improve and what can we do to get even better. So I think it's always good to kind of stick with, again, I like to do things in threes. And there's a book that I ran across that I love, and I listen to the audiobook. I bike a lot, run a lot, and it's Make It Stick, The Science of Successful Learning. And I won't read the publisher's description. You can read it yourself. But they have a number of different myths that they dispel throughout the book. But the neat thing about the book is they actually use the teaching materials and the techniques in the book to help you remember the book. And I recommend that you go to makeitstick.net, and they're going to have 3 videos. Each of them has one of these 3 pearls. And there's many pearls in the book and many things that can help you. But the idea is that if you want learning to stick, you're going to do some part of these 3 things. And so I'll start with the first one. So the first kind of thing that they talk about is you need to share right after you learn something. So the idea is, you go and see a movie, and if you want to remember it, you just tell somebody about it and say, hey, I just saw this movie, and this is what it was about. It lets your brain know this is important enough that you're going to tell someone, so you should put it in long-term memory. So in studying for the NAPLEX or a licensing board, for instance, if you study cardiology, you should not only summarize what you learned as best you can from memory, you should also record it or tell someone about it. And I find that recording it works really well because what happens is you can kind of start thinking through the process, and it's almost like you're giving a lecture on it. And we know the data show clearly that when you're being lectured to, you'll remember very little. But if you actually are the lecturer, you're the person that's teaching, your retention is very high relative to a straight up lecture. Number 2, you want desirable difficulties. So if you're going into batting practice and you hit only fastballs, you'd be pretty good at hitting fastballs. And if you go into batting practice and hit only curveballs, you'd get good at curveballs. But if you practice hitting fastballs and curveballs, you would feel like you're really bad at both, and you wouldn't get very good at it. But in the long term, you would actually be better than either of the persons that hit only the one, because you are used to that kind of difficulty. You are used to those, quite literally, curveballs being thrown at you. And so while during the practice you felt like you weren't doing very well, you actually were. So if you're thinking about your studying for the licensing board, you would mix it up. You wouldn't just say, okay, I'm going to get really good at cardiology, I'm going to be done with that, and then I'm going to be really good at endocrine. You'd actually mix it up, and it would be a little frustrating in that you'd be like, gosh, I don't feel like I'm getting either of these. But when questions are thrown at you from different, as curveballs or fastballs, different types, you would actually do better. So number 1, you need to share right after you learn it. Number 2, you want desirable difficulties. And then number 3, intermittent practice. While we intuitively know that cramming the night before is not good, it's really more that you want to practice intermittent learning. So you teach a little on day 1, then try to retrieve it maybe on day 3, and then you learn what's on day 3, and then kind of remember 1 and 3, and then go on. So this is why it's better to have a Monday, Wednesday, Friday class of 1 hour each than to try to have a 3-hour all at once. Although the all at once is kind of nice in that it compacts everything, but it's better when you're studying to take 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, and kind of maybe study 1/3 of it on Wednesday, 1/3 of it on Friday, 1/3 of it on Sunday, and kind of work on it that way. So as you're thinking about, your own schooling, where have you had an opportunity to share after you've learned, or should have shared after you've learned, or maybe just left and like, okay, I got the notes, I'm good, where you should have probably shared it. One technique a lot of people use is to rewrite your notes, and what you're really doing is sharing with yourself, but you can do this out loud as well. Desirable difficulty. So when did you have kind of things thrown at you from different places, and it would have been nice, to do one at a time, And then the last one, intermittent practice. How do you spread out your studying in such a way that you can come back to it and that you're not all trying to learn all at once? So when I hear that somebody's going to start studying 8 hours a day for the licensing board after everything's over, that always kind of gives me pause, because I'm like, well, there's a much better way to do that, and that would keep things in long-term memory, and that would actually be much more beneficial to what you're going to do when you graduate. There are a couple of other links, cultofpedagogy.com/stick. That was a pretty good episode. And then this is a link to the actual book if you'd be interested in getting it. So after you've kind of got that, this is the best practice for teaching, and you want to think about creating a presentation and preparing it for publication. And so the first thing is do an outline. And I know you say, no, I just like to start writing. I don't want to do an outline. And when I'm talking about outline, I'm really meaning there's going to be 5 things you're going to want to do. And when I was in residency, I got kind of an oddball topic, ophthalmologic OTCs, which I knew nothing about. I mean, I knew a little, but, still the big debate about, is it 20 drops, 25 drops, 30 drops, how many drops in an ml? And so what I wanted to do was make sure that I covered things that if it's new to me, it's probably new to them as well. So the first thing I did was I wanted to define key terms so that when I say something, it'll be something that they've heard before, but I've also taken the time to break down the etymology. And I love etymology. It's kind of the way that you make sense of things that you've not known before. So one like schizophrenia, schizo means actually a break, and then phren kind of means brain or head, and then ia, condition of. So it's a condition of a break in the brain, and then of course you know what schizophrenia actually is in terms of a condition. So by going through the etymology and getting this picture of a split brain, you're like, oh, okay, I see literally in my head what you're doing. Second, background on the disorder. So many people just kind of dive into the topic without giving a background, like why does it matter? Where are we going to see this? When should we expect to see this? Okay, so on your ID rotation, you should expect to see, or in your psych rotation, or in your community rotation. So make it relevant to the audience and let them know, hey, this is the background and this is some stuff that you should know about it. 3 are subtopics. This is where most people start. They usually skip the key terms, skip the background, and so you're kind of, when you're writing fiction, or you're writing exciting nonfiction, you do want to go right in media res, which is right in the middle of the action. But when you're making a presentation on a topic that they know nothing about, you do want to make sure that you get that background before you get into the subtopics. And so when you're talking about depression, you can talk about maybe the 4 different kinds of antidepressants, or 5 different kinds really, SSRI, SNRI, TCA, MAOI, atypical, and then kind of go into maybe those before and then what's new, something like that. But make sure your subtopics have some way of, you can clearly follow where you're going with it. 4th, multiple choice questions. So while you are excited and you are talking about it, if you don't ask them questions, then it's going to be very tough. And while a 4-point multiple choice question is very good, throughout the presentation, I would actually ask questions. So I would say, so this would be an SSRI or SNRI. But then when I get to a multiple choice question, I would use all 4 with 3 detractors, 3 that are wrong and 1 that is right. Or you could even make a couple of them right and a couple of them wrong. But multiple choice questions. And then 5, just a reminder, most people do this at the end, not during, but go back and see where an image would be better. I'm not talking about tables and charts. I'm talking about images. Like, where would a picture really make this a lot easier to understand? Cardio, for example, the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system. In your head, you've got it. It goes from renin to angiotensinogen to angiotensin 1 to angiotensin 2. And that might be very visual for you, but for someone that's never seen it before, that kind of cascade picture is really helpful, or the clotting cascade where you come from the right and the left, the extrinsic, intrinsic, those types of things. Make sure you have some kind of image. So those 5 things: define the key terms, background on the disorder, subtopics, multiple choice questions, significant images. That's what will make a great presentation if you're asked to teach, whether it's a presentation to a group or a presentation to a formal class. Okay, so now we're at the so you've done this outline, and now you're actually going to create the presentation. And a mistake I see a lot is starting from slide 1 and just trying to get through it. It's like writing a book and saying, I'm going to write a book, I'm going to start with chapter 1, then go to chapter 2, and go to chapter 3, and it just doesn't work that way. What you want to do is you want to kind of put in these slides where, okay, I'm going to do key terms, and then I'm going to work on the background, and then I'm going to work on the subtopics, and then I'm going to work on what's next, and so forth. What you don't want to do is you don't want to just not worry about the outline and just kind of start writing. Okay, this is the title, this is some important stuff, because the more set up it is, the more frame you have, the easier it is for other people to write it down. So what you want to do is make it really easy for them to take notes. So you put number 1, key terms. They'll write down number 1, key terms, and then they'll have those terms. Number 2, background, then they'll have background. And they'll say, wow, what a really great presentation. What they're really saying is, what a really organized presentation. Not only was it organized in its presentation, but I was organized in my head or on my notes. And that's really important. So as you're filling in, I recommend putting those topic categories first, putting the titles of the slides first, and then, and only then, after you've done that for the whole presentation, then you go and fill in what you think is important. And of course, make sure to put as many images as you can. Next one would be actually creating and preparing it for publication. So there's a number of ways to make a PowerPoint. I use Camtasia, which is a program that I just have a microphone and it records, whether it's a PowerPoint or what I'm doing now with a Microsoft Word piece of paper. You can use it, or you can even put just the notes at the bottom of each slide or make some kind of sound recording. But the reason I ask you to do this is because you often don't listen to yourself, and what you want to do is find out, are there any things that I can really improve on? So most people don't notice their own filler words, ums, ahs, so, or another important thing, or when somebody's answering a question, absolutely, they like to use that word as well. And you don't know those filler words are there, and you can start to remove them and replace them with pauses. Pauses make you sound smart. So instead of saying, so next we have, you just say, and we end with angiotensin 2. Then, and so, of course I use and so, you can see how much better it is to have a pause rather than that. And with the recording, you can always edit it and stuff like that, but when you're in front of people, maybe not. And then the last one, this is something that maybe people don't think about, but if you've organized your presentation well and you've started to kind of create your own niche, then the last part I would want someone to do is to actually create and edit to some extent their recording of it. So after you've become kind of this expert, people will ask you to write chapters for them. And I use Temi.com, T-E-M-I, and many people use Rev.com. It's a little more expensive. And what it does is it gives you a transcription of what you've said. And once you have that transcription, it's a lot easier than trying to transcribe it yourself. It's just, without the pedal, it's really hard to do very well and very quickly. It takes forever. But if you already have the words there, you can kind of listen to it. And then what you can do is improve your presentation. So while we're just working on a week in this right now, what you would do is you would go through the whole thing, present it, then you would do the whole thing again, look at it and say, okay, well, this is what I like, this is what I didn't, or even have other people look at it. And then you can redo the presentation based on what you heard. And there's so much that you'll find in there like, wow, I just kind of rambled here about this, or I didn't really seem very confident here. you'll be amazed at how much you can get out of a transcript of something that someone's done. But that's what I would start as you're kind of thinking of publication and you're starting to think of, what am I an expert in? This way you actually have the physical transcription, and it wasn't just a presentation, but it's a presentation and a paper, which can lead to your research or whatever presentations you're going to need to do.